back to the CCTW Experience, where we outline issues facing the modern American today. Today's episode will be focusing on the housing crisis, the historical policies that influence it, and why the average American can't afford to build equity in their homes. Today we have Tommy Roach, Chris Sui, and Wilson Kroll weighing in on this issue.
Hello, I'm Tommy. So I think a growing number of Americans are becoming victims of this housing crisis, which is stemmed from the lack of affordable housing and similar economic and social and political problems from the past reaching now into our future. So I kind of wanted to just give you guys.
Could you define for us affordable housing, please?
Yeah, so affordable housing is as deemed affordable to those with a household income or below the median as rated by national government or local government by a recognized housing affordability index.
Huh, very interesting. So, affordable housing is just something that applies to the median American that they can afford. Is that correct?
Yes, it's for that class who can't really afford what is essentially popular on the market.
So, like a safe home in a safe area with adequate amount of bedrooms, stuff like that.
Yes,
It's out of the realm of possibility. Like they're being priced out of the market in these specific sectors.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yeah, and affordable housing is just essential to a community because it brings people from all over together. And let's say you need a job and the commute is just too far and you can't afford it because your job won't cover those expenses. That's where affordable housing has a great beneficial value because those people are already in that town. So the commute would be less. And that's just one factor we'll be talking about.
So my question for you, Chris, is like, what's the historical background to the housing crisis? What policies have influenced modern America, and how have those policies affected certain groups of people?
Well, first of all, I should probably introduce myself. My name's Chris. To answer your question, Susie, housing wasn't really a problem until the mid to late 1800s. I would say around that time, policymakers were sluggish about initiating any response and instituting change to that housing as we know it. Like the federal government didn't want to step in. It was mostly up to the people to think about how they wanted to build their properties. Back then, it was mostly about self-sustenance and all that. So this created deplorable housing conditions, as you may know it, and this would continue to be a trend during the massive job creation of the Industrial Revolution of the 1850s. I would say that housing policy is often shaped by motivations that aren't transparent, but they need to be understood if we want to create a better policy for our industry today.
So, Chris, are there any specific policies, like historical policies, that you can outline have affected the housing crisis today?
I would say because of WW2, the Shipping Act enacted by President Woodrow Wilson definitely finally enabled the federal government to finally be involved in housing, and it allowed housing on a larger reformed scale. So, which built around 16,000 homes. However, certain practices such as redlining um, did not enable many home buyers to purchase and be able to buy houses
So,
in these
Chris,
developments.
do you mind just explaining to the listeners what redlining is and how it has this big effect?
Sure. Redlining is the discriminatory practice of denying mortgage loans and other financial services, to residents of certain neighborhoods based on racial or ethnic composition. And this is a historic policy that existed before the Civil Rights Act of 1964, 65-ish.
I agree. I think you're referring to the Fair Housing Act. So I've actually done some research of my own on this policy. It kind of started in the 1930s, or maybe a little bit earlier than that, and it was basically the government drawing out maps, large maps of cities and certain areas, and those that were outlined in red, like for example, a zip code could be outlined in red, and the government wouldn't federally subsidize the mortgage loans given by banks. So basically, the government couldn't guarantee, or the government wouldn't guarantee a loan given by a bank to one of these areas.
And when did this stop? Did the Fair Housing Act put an end to this practice? And how would you, I guess, define the effects today? Because this sounds like this was a widespread issue.
It was a pretty widespread issue. The Fair Housing Act did eliminate redlining from a federal level, but the effects were still widespread. I mean, people were unable to buy homes, and I mean, I have a quote here from CNN, something like that, that the key to the net worth of most Americans isn't a stock portfolio, but the equity accumulated in their homes. This equity has created generational wealth for many. Thus, this wealth can fund college educations or finance small businesses. But without home ownership, which is central to the American dream, some of these realities, it's a reality that some groups of people don't get to experience.
Thank you for saying that, TT. I think you brought up a lot of great points. Chris, you as well. But I think this unfortunate practice reinforced racial segregation and inequality by concentrating investment and economic opportunity in more white or less risky neighborhoods while depriving often qualified minority residents of the same opportunity. This contributed to the lower home ownership rates, reduced property values, and diminished economic mobility in these red line areas. Historically, real estate has appreciated in value over time. Property ownership allows individuals and families to build equity as their home increases in value, and they pay down loan values. Many people, many people have a home equity line of credit, which allows them to take loans on the appreciated value of their home, which can go to things you mentioned, CT. But most importantly, homeownership provides stability and security, offering protection against rising rental costs and the risk of displacement. Because of policies like redlining, portions of minority groups have been unable to take advantage of real estate market and the products and services offered from banks to increase their wealth.
I completely agree, Tommy, and I think that it could definitely be a reason as to why the average white family wealth is about 250,000. That's like average net worth, and black family wealth is at an average of 27,000. And I mean, it's something super interesting is that wealth isn't actually the only metric that's affected by lower home ownership rates. Historical redlining is also linked to an increased risk of diabetes, hypertension, and early mortality due to heart disease. And in previously redlined areas, people that are below the federal poverty level had a crime rate of 40 per 100,000 people, which is more than double the rate of violent crimes in high-income neighborhoods, which is about 16 per 1,000, which is, that's actually a lot more. Whoops. And because of these raised crime rates, investors are hesitant to gentrify these areas because as it's a much greater risk than developing in more stable areas. And in 1968, the Fair Housing Act was introduced, which eliminated redlining entirely, but the effects are still widespread, as I said before.
So now that we know a little bit more about affordable housing and what it is, Chris, can you please explain to me why people don't like the idea of affordable housing?
Sure, Tommy. First off, I'd like to say that to define NIMBYism, it's more of an acronym. It stands for not in my backyard. Literally, it pretty much says that it literally means that people don't want affordable housing where they live, probably because of the culture, because of the rules that have been ingrained into the community. Furthermore, the spread of NIMBYism can be contributed mostly to the housing crisis because generally suburbs are based around single-family homes that have been developed so that to the point where resident sentiments in those communities have resisted higher density developments that could provide for more affordable housing due to one reason or another, be it aesthetics, culture, the encroachment of modern day culture, et cetera, and it could be a variety of factors that influence this as well.
So, Chris, you're saying that people aren't really against affordable housing, and it's in the essence of affordable housing, but people are more against of having affordable housing where they live.
Yes, because they see it as a contributor to some sort of, you could say, crime or some sort of negative,
I
I
also
guess.
kind of think there's some like infrastructure strain. You know, if there's a big 300 unit affordable housing complex going up, then people don't really want 300 families moving in and 300 more families sending their kids to public schools or using public transportation and stuff like that. I think that's probably why as well.
Yes, that's a great point, CT. And I think, it's not that people are evil. It's more they definitely like the idea. But kind of what you were saying, if you just bought a house and you want privacy, you want quietness, but then now there's construction next to you and there's all these people who were not there before, it kind of disrupts that. And
Well, there's actually a great example of this in New Canaan called Weed Street. I forget what it was, but it was a high density affordable housing development in New Canaan, Connecticut, where it was being built on a very high value, very nice street, and people have been opposing it for a long time because once that comes in, property values come down, average rents go down as well, and a lot of equity is lost in your properties because there's a lot less money in them. So I think that's NIMBYism is probably the biggest problem facing affordable housing. Not that people are against the idea of it, but more that they're against having it
Yeah.
where they live.
exactly.
So Tommy, tell me about what affects affordable housing today and why isn't it as readily available as it was 50 years ago?
Well, that's a great question, USCT. And I think some of the main reasons why the housing market has just been so expensive is because, one part, it's not really obviously the main cause, but it does have a little effect, is that there's these big companies, you see this a lot with private equity, they're buying up single family homes, like buying a lot, and then they're raising the rent and the prices of these houses that the average American just can't afford. So this causes mortgage rates are just skyrocketing, and the high demand for single homes are going up, but people can't afford them.
So these big companies are they buying up like a bunch of houses in specific areas, or is it just like the whole country? Is it like they're marginalizing? Are they marginalizing, or not marginalizing, like monopolizing the whole country for their benefit, or just specific areas?
Um, yeah, I think they're definitely attacking these areas where they know that these homes will be easy access and they will be able to raise the price of these homes and people will not be able to afford them. And we're probably gonna have to restart that a little bit.
So
Just ask that question
so
again.
these investment companies are buying up houses and converting them to rental properties, which creates a more competitive market with fewer available homes, which creates further inflated home prices.
Yes. So CT, what are some other reasons why housing has become super expensive?
That's a great question, Tommy. Houses are unaffordable for a multitude of reasons, like one you just highlighted. Private equity companies and investment companies buying up specific areas and raising the rents and holding the assets. A lot of it is because of rising land costs and construction costs. If a piece of land is expensive, a developer's already going to be hesitant, and then to build an affordable house on an expensive piece of land is incredibly difficult to do, and constructing things is incredibly difficult to do. Just in the last year, construction costs have been up for concrete, lumber, anything like that, about 30%, which has cut down the rate of construction tremendously. Also, mortgage rates are very, very high, and that leads to people having to put either larger down payments on these loans, but they don't have the money to put in a large down payment, or just like relying on these banks with huge loans, like 30-year loans at 8%, which is ridiculous. It's
Yeah,
incredibly high. Yeah.
and that's a great point. And as we kind of like move towards the solutions to solve the housing crisis, I was actually speaking with my mom last night, who is, funny enough, she is a real estate developer. And we were talking about the housing crisis and how housing is just super expensive. And one point she brought up is that she thinks that people are looking in the wrong places because the reason why land is so expensive in certain areas is because of
High
supply
demand.
and demand, high and demand. So if there is not a lot of land and there's houses everywhere, that land is going to be worth a lot more if it's hard to get. But if you go to a place that's more rural and there's a lot of open land and it pretty much feels like infinite land, that land's going to be a lot cheaper. But what I've noticed is people want to live on the coast, near the cities, New
People
York
want to live where
City.
people are.
People want to live where people are, exactly. But I think in the future we're gonna have to see more of a America like empty
Shift into
land
rural areas.
shift into the rural areas in the Midwest, in these places where there's not a lot of people and people just don't think of. And eventually that can get turned into there'll be more cities there. And I don't know. I just think that would be something people have to look at because, of course, like New York City is not like it's just been expensive. It's been expensive forever because of its location. And I don't think a lot of people realize that.
That's very interesting, and I want to also highlight this little chart I have here. It's about the sale percentage of homes sold by investors in 2021. Um, did you guys know that 33% of homes in Georgia were sold by investors or subsidiaries of investors?
Wow.
I think that's huge, and that corporations are buying homes in America and raising prices, and it's a little scary because the average American won't be able to afford a solid, safe home. So, Chris, let's talk about some solutions. How can we make sure that this doesn't happen, and help us understand why there isn't more affordable housing and how we can build more?
Well, I'll start off by saying that housing right now has created current housing market has created some of the worst income elasticity that we've seen to date, and it's made it so that people cannot achieve the American dream without already coming from affluent, high-income neighborhoods. It's not that these affluent neighborhoods are important. It's just that it seems that, and I'll just segue into this. It just seems that exposure during childhood to the nice places such as affluent, high-income neighborhoods is one of the most important things for young children. A Looking at the source here by Opportunity Atlas, which tracked children's incomes in adulthood to adulthood using U.S. Census data and tax data, the data shows that a child growing up in one such affluent neighborhood can earn up to an average income of $56,000 more compared to $33,000 in an adjacent neighborhood. And the age at which a child moves or experiences such neighborhoods is critical in getting these benefits. And I guess you can say that the older they become, the lower their projected income is. At age 24, there is no economic benefit in moving. And high mobility neighborhoods, I guess, are just regular neighborhoods with lower poverty rates, more stable family structure, and just general better outstanding social capital and stuff. Like the sentiment and the culture and the vibe of the place have just been built up to where it generates a friendly, sort of community, and that is something that I think everyone vies for nowadays.
So what makes a high mobility neighborhood?
I guess you could say one that's close to achieving the American dream relative to its, like I mentioned before, poverty rates, family structure, and just the general economic sort of situation of a community.
So, Chris, you bring up the American dream, but so what is the American dream? Because I know people from all over the world and America can think of this, and just anybody has different ideas of what it is. But could you share what you think the American dream is?
I think that the American dream, from what we know about housing and what has been said so far, is a sort of mix of personal achievement through social and economic status and gain. It's sort of like you could sort of define it as like personal success that stems from your economic rise or your social rise, and sort of seeing those statistics, I guess, improve over time. It's You sort of use it as like a benchmark of success, like a benchmark that you've achieved personal freedom in the things that you find yourself doing all the time.
I agree. I think the American dream not only has the monetary success part of it, but I think it also it's about family, and it's about being able to be in a safe place and express yourself, like express your religion, sexuality, stuff like that, freely, and not have to worry about oppression or somebody coming in and saying, no, you're not allowed to do that. And I think that's a huge part of the American dream.
Yeah.
I also think the American dream could be being successful but coming from nothing. And I think today, like we also talked about redlining, that kind of makes it hard, and that's why we need to find solutions to this. But I think generally in America, that's kind of almost what it's known for. Like I remember learning about in history, when all the immigrants came from Europe.
It was the American dream,
Yeah,
Nothing better than the West.
they came for prosperity and just to achieve success and overall just happiness. And
Yeah.
Yep.
I think overall prosperity is like a major factor in the American dream, especially in terms of like growing your own social image and stuff. I will
with having like individual opinions.
Yeah. I guess now that we're at this point, now that we know why the housing market has been affected by these economic and like social conditions, what do you both think? What do you think, Tommy? What do you think, CT? What do you think about potential solutions? Because I know there are lots of different ways we can go about solving or even eradicating this problem entirely, not just in the U.S. but in other parts of the world.
You know what I think? I think we should bring in Wilson Kroll to talk about this next segment, so we can go more in depth into the solutions and stuff like that.
I think so too.
Thanks for the question, CC. So I think it's obvious that capital investment and government investments are needed to build and like rehabilitate these homes to like be affordable to the lowest income margins of people. And so I think one way we can improve this is through reinforcing and overfunding the National Housing Trust Fund, the HTF. And so basically the National Housing Trust Fund provides grants to states to build and preserve housing targeted to like extremely low income households, and specific those with incomes less than 30% of the median income in the area or less than the federal poverty line. So I think if we can increase funding to agencies and government funds like this, we can increase the funding to the people that need the money the most. And then I think just for a stat to back up how it's being funded. So in 2019, $249 million was in the HTF funding was allocated to states, and then $323 million in 2020, and then $693 million in 2021. So since we've already touched upon how housing can substantially boost the economy by billions, even trillions of dollars, through allowing people to keep jobs and utilize the tools of wealth that houses are, I think you see that this amount is really nothing compared to what affordable housing can do for the economy. And then another solution I thought is to spend more, allocate more money into not just developers, building these large homes for richer classes of people, but if we can focus on pre-built houses, it can severely boost the overall output of houses due to the cost and the times to build the houses. So we can have more houses, which can push down the rate of, how much money you need to buy a house. And it can also severely increase the amount of people that have access to these affordable houses. And so also those homes that are built, pre-built, reduce the carbon footprint substantially compared to unpre-built houses. And so I think if we can increase loans to contractors looking at those type of houses compared to larger single family non starter home houses, we can help solve the issue. So yeah.
Now we will have a real estate developer, Jen Roach, answer the following questions. Why are developers hesitant about building affordable houses in expensive areas such as Greenwich, and what are some solutions to help build affordable housing in areas like that? And what incentives can be created for developers? Thank you, Mrs. Roach, for coming on our podcast.
when I have developed, I always look at three things. How can I make a positive impact? What does the community I'm developing need? And what kind of return on investment do I need to have to create and do a project? And so sometimes it doesn't work. And in creating affordable housing as a private developer, if you have a piece of property and you can only build one unit, then you're going to want to build the one unit that's going to have the largest return. And so that would not be affordable. But the incentives, and I think why they've had things like 830G, is that they say to developers, okay, look, instead of you just being able to build one, you can build 6, but you have to give back, 20% of those. So, that would be probably 2 of the units in that case. And therefore, making it more attractive and incentivizing builders to build affordable housing. So I think on paper that works. I think the reason that it's been controversial is that it's superseding local zoning rules, and local zoning rules are there for a few reasons. And yes, sometimes they need to change and they need to increase the density, but other times it's because it's a town. Like Greenwich is a town, it's not a city, and it wants to keep a town feeling.
All right, guys, that's all we got for you today. Thank you for tuning in to the CCTW Experience.
I'm Tommy.
I'm Chris.
I'm CT Foster.
Thank you guys so much for another amazing episode.
We'll see you in the next one.
See you in the next one.